Welcome to Geological's mini-series dedicated to sports and orthopedic acupuncture. For the next few days, I'll be bringing you several podcasts a day from the Sports Acupuncture Alliance's conference in San Jose, California. In addition to interviews and discussions with speakers of the conference, you'll also be hearing from participants, and you'll have a special front row seat at a roundtable conversation around the issues of running a sports medicine practice. These conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. All the sponsors here provide helpful products or services that you'll find beneficial in your clinical work. Want to get better at treating concussions and other neurological conditions? Clayton Shoe has some innovative methods. Blue Poppy, your new one-stop shop, has speedy shipping options on everything that you need for your clinic. Later in the show, Jane offers you helpful suggestions on how to raise your rates, and Golden Flower Chinese Herbs shares a journey of healing that I think you'll recognize. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Geological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast. Picture this. Your clinic is buzzing with patients, and then you realize that you're down to your last box of needles. No need for panic, because Blue Poppy, your one-stop shop for all your acupuncture needs, they ship orders received before 3 p.m. on the same day. With a quick visit to Blue Poppy's website, you can order premium needles, herbal formulas, and that special Dr. Bob's oil that your patients love. Blue Poppy understands practitioners can't keep patients waiting. That's why they strive to get you what you need when you need it. From high-quality Chinese herbs and formulations to acupuncture supplies and clinical essentials, Blue Poppy has served practitioners for nearly 40 years with products that meet the highest of standards. Discover everything Blue Poppy has to offer by visiting www.bluepoppy.com, and don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and more. Ever found yourself listening to a geological conversation and thinking, wow, I needed to hear that? Yeah, me too. And I never know when I'm going to hear a guest say something that stops my world and reboots it with a larger perspective. If these conversations have ever helped you to feel more grounded, more inspired, or just less alone in this strange and wonderful work we do, consider becoming a member or supporting the podcast with a bit of tithing to the donation jar. It helps keep the lights on here at the Geological Sound and Motion Lab so that we can bring you these conversations every Tuesday morning. You'll find all the details at geological.com. Thanks for listening and for being a part of this.
Hey there. I'm Cameron Jafari, an acupuncturist from Los Angeles. So I started learning nanopuncture from Dr. Clayton Shoe because I was facing these complex neurological conditions like stroke and MS in my clinic, and I just felt like I lacked a solid process to treat them. Brain-related issues always felt like a whole different animal, and I was looking for a clinical system that worked and could guide me through them. So after attending my first nanopuncture seminar, I was able to apply the process pretty quickly and with pretty amazing results. I remember the first stroke patient I saw afterwards was a guy who had had a stroke 2 years back, and he couldn't talk at all. And after a few treatments, he started saying a few words. And a few treatments after that, he could actually have conversations. It was pretty incredible. So this is why I feel like nanopuncture is the future of acupuncture neurology. And you can be a part of that. Their next seminar is on treating concussions and is being co-taught by both Dr. Shu and Dr. Ayla Wolf in New York City on April 26th and 27th. To learn more, visit nanopunctureseminars.com.
The Sports Acupuncture Alliance was created to promote the study and practice of sports and orthopedic acupuncture. I'm delighted that they were willing to partner with Geological to bring you this mini-series so that those of you who were not able to attend the conference could learn from the speakers as well as the participants and to get a taste of what it's like to be here at this special event. Please enjoy these discussions and take what you learn here and use it in your clinic. You know, needles are an essential aspect of our practices that I suspect most of us don't know much about, other than that we have some brands or types that we'd like to use. But what goes into a needle and how needle technology over the years has changed, Well, I know for myself, I'm pretty ignorant about it. So I'm delighted to have Matt Pike here with me. Matt is a principal at LASA OMS, and he's also the president of Sarin USA. He's been involved with the sourcing and manufacture of acupuncture needles for a long, long time. We are going to get into the backstory on this essential tool that we all use every day in the work that we do. And we're going to talk a little about a new needle that's being introduced here at the conference that's been specifically designed and manufactured for sports and orthopedic acupuncture. Matt, welcome to Geological.
Thanks for having me, Michael. It's my pleasure.
I'm looking forward to talking with you today. You know, I know that you're a principal at LASA, one of our sponsors, and you're also the president of Sarin America. So you've got a lot of experience with needles and with acupuncturists. This is not an infomercial for you guys. I've got you today because you have a lot of experience with acupuncture needles. Can you give us a little background on how you've gotten involved with needles and how long you've been doing this?
Yeah, so it all started, my mother married a person who was an acupuncturist that had a hard time when he graduated from acupuncture school finding product. So he took it upon himself to travel to Asia and start collecting products. And you know, as you can imagine, back in the time when acupuncture is fairly new in the United States, he ended up graduating from the New England School of Acupuncture, which is the oldest school still in existence in the United States. And he started bringing in all these exciting products and handing them out to his friends. And before you knew it, this company called OMS Medical Supplies began. And he never really was able to have a big practice because sourcing products and selling them in the U.S. market to people who needed them kind of became this overtaking piece of his life. So that's kind of what got me into it from a young age, going on vacations with the family and speaking to this person. So his name was Thomas Rihimaki, and he was the founder of OMS Medical Supplies and then essentially a co-founder of Sarin America, which is a joint venture between Sarin Corporation and OMS Medical Supplies. And then a little bit later in life, my mother created a company called LASA Medical Supplies, and then the two companies merged. So you can imagine as a child kind of following around with them. That's kind of what I spoke to he was a stepfather of mine, and that's how we kind of conversed with each other is acupuncture supplies. So then later I was on the board of directors of Sarin America, which I started learning more and more about acupuncture needles from a relatively young age. And then maybe 12 years ago or so, my wife and I took over the operations of LASA OMS.
I did not know that backstory. That's fascinating. He basically had his own itch that he needed to scratch, and turns out that he helped all his friends get their hands on good needles and supplies.
That's right. And at the time, OMS was the only importer of acupuncture needles. So kind of an exciting time to be. And you could imagine the excitement he had when he was finding different types of high-end moxas and different types of cupping sets, et cetera. And so it was essentially something that was really a passion for him.
Well, it's a whole different world in Asia where it's common.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. What are some changes that you've seen with needles over the years? I mean, you grew up with this basically.
Yeah. So I think in order to talk about the changes, you probably need to take a little step back and understand where we were 40 years ago in acupuncture or longer. So back from the beginning, acupuncture needles were all reusable. They had to be autoclaved or somehow sterilized between uses. And all acupuncture needles were handmade. And it was really in 1978, a small company in Japan revolutionized the industry. And they created the first single-use disposable acupuncture needle. And so today you wouldn't even think of acupuncture as having reusable needles, but it was really not that long ago, 1978, when that company revolutionized the industry. And the name of that company is Sarin Corporation. So they created that first single-use disposable needle. And really, what did that do? It allowed acupuncture to be accepted in the Western countries, and which ultimately paved the way for the FDA to be able to classify needles as class 2, because they would never allow a reusable needle to be used in a large scale in the United States.
Wow. What does it mean to be a class 2 needle?
Different levels of classification. Class 1 being kind of very simple medical devices. Class 2 being something a little bit more invasive, like an acupuncture needle that pierces the skin. And then class 3 would be more like implantable stuff. So at each of these different levels of medical devices requires a different levels of scrutiny by the FDA. To bring a class 1 medical device into the United States, it could be as simple as just registering the device. But to bring a class 2 medical device, it requires something called a 510K, which is showing that that needle is equivalent of some other needle that's been accepted in the United States.
So in 1978, there was a revolution in needles that really, without that, we wouldn't be where we are today.
That's true. I mean, some other company would have done it, but it happened to be Sarin that did that.
Mm-hmm. And it really paved the way for things. I remember when I was in acupuncture school, oh my God, 20 years ago, at this point, and we had an autoclave, and we learned to do that because it was just something that you were supposed to learn to do. And I remember getting out of school and going and pricing an autoclave and thinking about all the Michigasa goes with autoclaving. And I thought, why would I ever do that when I've got disposable needles?
Exactly.
Yeah.
From a safety standpoint, it wouldn't work.
Yep. So they were handmade then, and now how are they made? I mean, obviously by machines. What's the process look like?
So surprisingly, what's interesting is 40 years later, there's still the majority of the needles manufactured in the world market are still handmade. The only difference between what was pre 40 years ago and now is that those needles are single-use disposable. So the majority of the needles are still handmade, and it's a person sitting in front of a grinding wheel with essentially wire, stainless steel wire, and very carefully grinding those needles. And these people are amazing at what they do, but obviously when it's handmade, you're introducing all sorts of human error. So Sarin needles, on the other hand, they've gone through many different phases of manufacturing, from the beginning of being more rudimentary, kind of simple, kind of train systems where a trolley goes through an assembly line and little mini robots would pick it up and do some operation on them. And now it's these huge, robotic machines, almost like what you would see in a car assembly plant, that are moving the needles from station to station and acting upon it in different ways. So automated manufacturing of the grinding machines, those are all, the grinding wheels are running through a computerized system. Then the needles go through an entire bathing system where they do more of a basic solution, or acidic solution, more water-based solution, and they spend a tremendous amount of time cleaning the needles to get all the solvents, get all the grease, get all the manufacturing stuff out of it. And then it goes to the assembly location, which is in a clean room, and those robotic machines will put it through its process, ultimately coming out with boxes of needles, all untouched by human hand. So it's pretty amazing system. If you like technology, you would just be blown away taking a tour of the Sarin manufacturing facility.
This episode is brought to you by Jane, the clinic management software that I use to keep my practice running smoothly. So let's talk about something that can be a little bit uncomfortable: raising your fees. I know. This is something that might feel awkward, but it doesn't have to. With a bit of planning and care, you can handle it in a way that feels right for you and your patients. One tip: give yourself at least 2 months to prepare. This gives you time to get comfortable with the change and let your patients know what's happening. You can share the news through emails, booking reminders, or even just a friendly little sign in your clinic, and avoid over-apologizing. Instead, keep it straightforward and matter of fact. Keeping things consistent across the ways that you communicate can really help avoid confusion. Fee increases aren't always easy, but you're not on your own here. For more tips and ideas on how to communicate these changes with confidence, check out frontdesk.chain.app and look for the article, How to Tell Your Clients You're Raising Your Fees. Oh, and one last thing, if you're ready to give Jane a try, use the code CHEOLOGICAL for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. Sounds fascinating. Well, you said most of the needles are still handmade. So does that include, I mean, I know there's some other big manufacturers. There's like the Korean DBCs.
Yep.
There's, I don't know all the brands from China these days. Are they still hand grinding those, or do they have some sort of automation?
Surprisingly, a lot of them are, and I don't want to mention names at this point, but like the Korean manufacturing company that you talked about, I visited their facility. Amazing, state of the art. If you saw the two systems, they are completely like separate. There's nothing similar to their manufacturing process, but even the DBC needles, it's a very simplistic manufacturing system that's extremely fast and extremely efficient. And Dongbang, as you may know, is probably the largest manufacturer of acupuncture needles in the world. They produce well over 1 billion needles a year. And this company has to have fast processing to be able to support the large throughput. So there's an amazing system, but there's still some kind of manual components to it. Whereas Sarin, on the other hand, is a much slower process. The machines cost a lot more money, and they wouldn't be able to handle the same throughput given the same square footage. And they don't have to, since their whole goal is producing the highest quality needle in the world. It's, the process is a little bit slower to be able to support that. Mm-hmm. Other big changes between them, as you mentioned DBC, and I'm talking about Sarin a little bit, is the quality control in each of those steps. But that being said, so that's an example of two different companies out there that have these automated systems. But in China, the majority of the needles developed are all done by hand. There is one company that has some automated manufacturing. That's the Huatou company as well, which just recently was purchased maybe 7 years ago by a large Chinese public company that's invested a lot of money into their manufacturing.
Yeah, I suspect as time goes on, we'll probably see more and more of these manufacturers move toward this automation. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think as time goes on, people demand quality. And in order to produce a high quality needle, you have to have automated manufacturing. When you have a manual process, it's all about error. Humans make mistakes, and it's a non-repeatable process. So the only way to have a manufacturing process that is that you can produce high quality needles, you need to have an automated manufacturing process that has reproducible processes. So if something you find out that could be improved upon, you can modify the machine, you can insert another step, you can modify or tweak the machines to be able to fix that problem. But if you don't have that automated manufacturing process, you can't reproduce the needle the same way every time, and therefore you can't increase the quality of the needle, or at least it's very difficult to. So I think long-term things will go towards that, and I think users want high-quality products, so they're going to start weeding out the needles that are not as superior.
Well, I think as an acupuncturist, I know for myself, I just want to know that I can open up a packet of needles and do my job without having to think too much about how's this needle going to work. I mean, on occasion, I go to insert a needle and it's like something's not quite right with the way it's going in, but it is so phenomenally rare these days.
Right.
I mean, I love handmade stuff, but I like the idea of non-handmade needles.
Right, exactly. Well, I think it's just a testament that you're not the only person out there with those requests, and that's why companies like Las Omas exist, that are trying to weed out all of the bad needles out there and making sure that any product that we sell are products that are quality and going to be able to do their job well. So I think you, along with all acupuncturists out there, feel the same way.
Well, this is clearly part of the evolution of our particular trade here in the States. Like you were saying, your stepfather, he was just looking to find some needles, period. Just get some needles. And now we're looking at, very high tech stuff needles are simple and yet they're high tech.
They are. And I think, if it was just somebody putting a needle in the body, that's one thing. But the acupuncturist, there's a little bit more there. You guys are trained to be able to understand, I'm going through this layer of the skin. Now I'm going in through the muscle tissue, and now I'm touching bone. And to be able to feel all those different areas of the body and be able to do your job well requires a refined needle that is going to be able to support that. And I think even though, like you said, at a high level, these needles are very simplistic, there's a lot of technology that goes into producing a high quality needle, not to mention they're so thin. The worst possible thing that could happen to an acupuncturist is, God forbid, a needle breaking in a human body. And so dealing with these such small needles and making sure that the needles are quality enough that they won't have anything collapse during a treatment is really important. So we spend a tremendous amount of time every year analyzing all the needles that we sell, as well as analyzing new needles and enter the U.S. market and making sure we understand which needles are good, which needles aren't good, and making decisions about what products to carry based on that.
Yeah, well, I'm glad we got people like you out there on the front line checking this stuff out for us. I'd like to get your thoughts on another aspect of needles here. There's often some discussion that I've heard among my colleagues about coated versus non-coated needles. Can you tell us a bit about this?
Yeah, and that's an area where there's a lot of confusion about this subject. Ultimately, the coated needle helps the needle be inserted a little bit more easily. The downfall is the FDA doesn't require any verbiage on the packaging to suggest whether it is coated or not. And on top of that, I think there's also a tremendous amount of confusion where Las Olmes did a survey recently asking people about the needles that they use and what's important. And what was really surprising is a lot of the people were adamant that I don't like silicone coating or any type of coating on my needle for that matter. Yet the needle that they said that they used did have silicone coating, or I don't, or vice versa. And we thought that was really surprising that there's so much confusion about it. And on top of that, there's many different types of coating. There's parylene coating, there's Teflon coating, there's different types of silicone oils. And then there's the more silicone, like sarin, for example, uses a particular type of silicone that only goes on the first few millimeters of the tip. And they can get away with this because the needle body is so polished that they don't need extra silicone to kind of mask any problems with the needles, any roughness and such. But the silicone that sarin uses, for instance, is cured at temperature. And when the silicone is cured, it's actually a hard substance. It's not an oil that doesn't come off of the needle. It needs an industrial solvent to be able to remove it. So there is a lot of confusion, and there is a lot of technology behind this. And I'll be the first to admit I don't know a tremendous amount about it, except that the silicone that sarin uses is a very special silicone that's used in a lot of hypodermic needles. But I do know that and there's a preference. Some people love silicone, some people don't want silicone, and there's confusion out there. So that's something we'll have to work on in the coming years to try to rectify.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like the FDA does not require this information to be on the package. And so it can be very difficult for the end user, acupuncturist in this case, to actually know what we have.
Well, I'll tell you, even more surprising, there was a company, again, I'm not going to name names, but there's a company that has needles in the United States that we approached and we're testing. As I mentioned, we do these tests annually on our needles and then periodically with other brands of needles. And we were able to find that there was a coating on the needle. And we asked the company, what kind of coating do you have? And they said, our needles aren't coated. So we sent it off to a lab where they did a test, and they were able to show that there was I don't remember all the chemicals, but silicone of some sort on the needle. And it was shocking to us to hear that. So maybe the importer of the needle didn't realize and the manufacturer wasn't telling them. But again, it just compounds that problem even more. It is something that we need to work on more. That being said, silicone oils and the silicone I talked about that sarin uses have been prevalent in hypodermic needles since the beginning of time. And the average amount of silicone on a hypodermic needle is somewhere along the lines of 10,000 times more silicon than on an acupuncture needle, just by virtue of the diameter being larger, the length being large of these needles. And people who have insulin issues, taking insulin, diabetics, I mean, they're putting those needles in their body over and over and over again. And you don't hear about problems with them. And in my a personal opinion, which may not matter much, I think it's fairly safe, and it's an accepted thing in the medical industry. But that being said, it's something that companies probably should be more transparent about.
Yeah. I did not realize that hypodermic needles, for a long time, as you say, have used silicone coatings. That was not even in my awareness, and that this is a very standard medical practice to coat needles.
Right. And a lot of the needle manufacturers actually produce their own silicone as well. I think that's been that way for many, many, many years.
Imagine this. A patient walks into your clinic. They're carrying more than the pain in their body. There's a story there. A history woven with the stress of long days, the ache of things unsaid, and the quiet longing for something to shift. You listen, not just with your ears, but with your hands, your intuition, your heart. It's not just about needles or a formula. It's about connection, understanding the threads that tie us together, mind, body, and spirit. That is where golden flower Chinese herbs comes in. Rooted in tradition and crafted with care, their formulas are more than herbs. They're a bridge between ancient wisdom and modern practice. Every bottle, a quiet partner in your work, helping you to meet your patients where they are. Because healing isn't just about treating symptoms. It's about creating trust, cultivating belonging, and helping someone feel truly seen. Golden Flower Chinese Herbs, your partner in practice and connection, where tradition meets care. Mm-hmm. You mentioned that you're constantly looking at products, you're reviewing products, you're constantly testing for quality. What kind of quality tests do you do? I mean, you sound a little bit like an herb importer in that, we have this product come in, let's see what we actually have.
Well, there's a lot that goes into manufacturing a needle, and there's a lot behind the scenes that one may not even realize. So when we do tests on needles, we test obvious things like tensile strength. We test things like the angle of the needle tip. Not only do we test the needle tip, but the angle that the needle tip makes, but we also measure the consistency. So if you see a needle tip that one needle is very pointed and the next needle is not so pointed, red flags come up right away. Hey, these are handmade. Similarly, you measure the length of the needle. Is the needle length always 30 millimeters, let's say, for the particular lot you're looking at, or is it sometimes 35 and sometimes 22 or 25? And that'll tell you a lot about their quality control and whether it's using an automated manufacturing process or is it done by hand. But then there's also items that are quite a bit less obvious, like needle cleanliness. There's a lot of needles out in the world market that are just not clean. I think I mentioned earlier with the sarin manufacturing process, they go through all of these different baths to be able to clean the needles from alkaline to acid and trying to get rid of all the residual byproduct of the manufacturing grinding process. So cleanliness is a big deal. And it doesn't matter if you sterilize the product, if it still has dirt on it, the residual manufacturing stuff, that's not good. So you've probably seen when you've inserted, say, an inexpensive needle into someone's body and you may remove it and see a little dark spot. And that's residual elements from manufacturing. So needle cleanliness is one. Does the needle detach from the handle? So you put a needle into a very thick muscle and you pull it out. Will the needle detach from the needle handle? And that's a big thing that we'll test also. If it's an automated manufacturing process, you can reproduce the process you did to assemble the needle. If it's made by hand, you can't. And then there's going to be discrepancies in those. And then another one that is not obvious at all is even the blister packaging. It has nothing to do with the needle itself at all, but the blister package, believe it or not, and people can test this at home when they open their favorite needle and you peel back the blister pack. Can you find holes in the glue that's holding that blister pack together? And if you can find a hole where you say, oh, there's a little bit of area that's missing with the glue, that's opportunity for air or other things to get into the blister pack that could compromise the sterility of the needle in the long run. So at any rate, there's many different things like that we look at, but then we do penetration testing tests that allows us to understand like how rough the needle is, whether it has silicone coating or other types of coatings, et cetera. So it's a fairly extensive test we do. Some of the things are more important than others, but it gives us a kind of a high level. We also test for bacteria and we test for mold. So it's quite a lengthy process. More recently, we've been more interested in softer needles and stiffer needles. So we're testing for those things as well, just to kind of get a breakdown of where our needles fit and whether anything has changed, as well as, what needles out in the U.S. market or world market are like as well.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned softer or harder needles. That's not something that I think about when I think about using an acupuncture needle. What are the issues or benefits of a harder or softer needle?
Well, it's really a matter of personal preference, but as time is going on, for facial acupuncture, for instance, a softer needle in general is more comfortable unless it gets to an extreme point where it's too soft and it's too difficult to insert and you can't control the direction of the tip. But even then, there's applications like in Japan where students who are learning acupuncture will use very special soft tip needles to be able to practice their insertions and make sure that they can control that tip better. On the flip side, stiffer needles are generally for longer needles that are being entered into the body. So veterinarians, for instance, need long, stiff needles, not veterinarians for the small animals, but I'm thinking more of the horses. Or sports acupuncture, where they're inserting needles in the deep tissues. They may benefit from longer, thicker needles. Well, if you want to make it more painless, then you want to decrease the gauge. But as you decrease the gauge, the needle becomes flimsier. So what techniques can you use from a manufacturing perspective to make those needles stiffer? So there's all sorts of things, from using different types of metal to different manufacturing processes they can use to try to make it stiffer.
I see. Well, that brings us to one of the big things I wanted to speak with you about today, which is here at the Sports Acupuncture Alliance's conference that we're at. There's a new needle being introduced, and it's been sort of designed here in the West. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So when you say design here in the West, let me just preface that we have a large network of researchers and educators that we work with, and they're constantly providing us feedback on how we can improve the existing products we have and how we can develop new products that would help them in their research or their education or their practices. So the new needle that we are developing is sports acupuncture needle. It's going to be slightly stiffer, like we talked about. So you can have thinner needles that are going to be less evasive, less painful, yet provide the same amount of stiffness. And we also, we have two needles that we're going to be launching then. One that we've already kind of pre-launched maybe 6 months ago, called the Sarin G type. And the Sarin G type also has an added benefit that it has a slightly, if you look at it next to another needle, it looks identical. But when you start zooming into a couple hundred times magnification, you'll notice that the needle tip is actually rounded. So there's a lot of interesting developments going on right now in the field of kind of sports acupuncture and stiffer needles and rounded tips. That's really exciting. But yes, we're going to be launching a needle called the Promax from Dongbong as well.
Great. You mentioned a rounder tip to the needle. What's the thought behind the benefit of that?
Yeah, interesting. So Sarin has a research, let's just say a state-of-the-art research and development department, and they have one job, and that's improving their needles. Let's say two jobs: inventing new needles and improving them. And going back in history, and this is why when I talk about Sarin and why I'm specifically talking about the research and development program, is you can remember back in the earlier part of our conversation that Sarin revolutionized industry by creating the first single-use disposable needle. But along the way, like every couple of years, they're constantly reinventing themselves and improving their products. And just of kind of notable things that they've done, they produced the first single-use disposable needle. They produced the thinnest needle. So the 0.10 millimeter Sarin J15 is the thinnest needle in the world. So even that in and of itself is a marvel. And being able to create that, to make that thin needle be stiff. So that's kind of the first inkling of when we started talking about stiffer needles. They have the shortest needle, 0.3 millimeters. And then behind the scenes, every year they have processes to tighten their tolerances and make their needles better. Like I mentioned, the needle tip angle, the lengths of the needles, bringing those tolerances down to make it better and better. But you need that state-of-the-art manufacturing research and development department to be able to do these things. So it's really fun to work with these guys to do this. To answer your question about the needle tip and the roundness, this is all coming from Sarin. And to talk about it conceptually is, if you have a needle that's incredibly sharp, that needle will penetrate and cut through all the tissue that you're inserting the needle into. But if that needle is more rounded, it just doesn't cut through everything in its way. There's a higher probability that it'll help push the skin molecules aside, help push that small little vein that it touches. And so conceptually, it kind of makes sense, but in practice, they were testing for facial acupuncture and realizing that needle actually produces less bruising. So this is stuff that's will be coming down the pike in years to come. So we ended up deciding to launch it first with the G-type needle, and it's there to be less painful and minimize bruising. And it's just an amazing technology that allows them to do that.
Yeah. When I think about a rounded tip, it makes me think about hydrodynamics. And when you think about boats, especially big ships, they don't have a sharp edge to their bow. They often have these rounded, bulbous bows because it goes through the water in a more smooth way.
Interesting.
And it sounds like with the acupuncture needles, this is a similar thing. You can either sort of slide between things with a rounded tip or cut through things with a sharper tip. And I would say, I'm thinking for myself as a practitioner, having the ability to go sort of around rather than through, or to be able to, sort of sneak something into a place without being invasive about it makes a big difference. Matt, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners before we get back to the conference here?
I think we covered a lot, Michael. I guess one thing I'd like to say is that we're all in one of the most exciting areas of medicine, and I'm really just thankful for having you invite me here to tell my story a little bit more.
Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Qiological or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Qiological.